Madam Clerk, would you show that Councilman Duvall and McDowell are here? And I will be chairing in the absence of the chairperson, Dr. Bustles, who I understand is looking at us on YouTube, so we have to be on our best behavior, Ed. She should be here in about 30 minutes, and we hope that she can get here to take it on.
Okay.
Our first item on the agenda is the goat bill that is coming up for use of livestock for clearing land. I understand, Victoria, you have a presentation to make? So we take the...
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having us here today. In addition to goat vegetation management, we will be discussing a few ongoing projects under animal services. The first being goat vegetation management. So this is a new program that we are hearing a lot about. And to be honest, we don't know a whole lot about it. Our department, along with some other city officials, have discussed this new practice, and we are learning that it is becoming a common practice in many counties. Should this move forward, we are proposing structured guidelines through an ordinance for this practice, and that would include a permit process issued to the homeowner with a permit fee, possible minimum lot square footage, and of course, identifying and outlining nuisance issues. For example, perhaps there would be no front yard grazing. We would want to ensure appropriate signage is put in place for fencing and ensuring that these practices are not conducted too close to any schools or daycares. Odorous nuisances would be taken into consideration as well. The timeframe and number of goats allowed per lot of size is still being considered, but we do feel there are some positive components to this practice, including that it is environmentally friendly, it's chemical free, and it's safer as terrain management is easier for goats versus some equipment. If there are any additional questions on this, I can hand the podium over to Mr. Porter.
Well, I
discussion.
have a couple of questions for you, Victoria. The additional information you have there is not included in the proposed ordinance. So are you anticipating that if we pass this thing, we'll pass this ordinance and then you'll fill that in with regulations?
We do feel there should be some structured guidelines included in the ordinance should this move forward.
Is there any requirement for us to say that? If this is going to be the ordinance, which is 2 paragraphs, and they want to add in the other stuff, is that done through a different
Well,
process?
it depends on what they're adding in and what's already in there. Where's Dana? Yeah.
The idea would be that we would have guidelines and,
Get to the microphone.
I'm loud anyway, so they probably pick that up.
Not that loud.
The idea would be that there would be guidelines depending on the department who is charged with enforcing or permitting it. And those permitting guidelines would be part of standard operating procedures within that department, not necessarily codified in the ordinance itself, because then every time something didn't work or you wanted to go back and say, 25 feet doesn't work, we want to do 35 feet, you'd have to go back and amend your ordinance. So the idea which would be whatever department was responsible for the administration of the permitting process and then the enforcement action would have standards and guidelines depending upon the various parcels that would be used. Because obviously the guidelines would be different between a residential area or a more industrial or commercial area that wanted it. And so you'd have different considerations there that would be set out in guidelines that would be available for them to see, just not codified in the ordinance.
So the specificity of those guidelines, we dig deeper into that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And be flexible, because what may work in one parcel isn't going to work in another parcel. You know, these folks are going to determine how many are going to be necessary in a parcel. Well, that may not be allowed in a very dense area or residential or backing up to a school or whatever you all decide you want to do or whatever staff wants to.
Touch on that.
Yeah, whatever the experts want to get together and put in those guidelines. But that individual department would have the guidelines and the flexibility to do that. And as long as it were published and open and available to folks, it doesn't have to be codified in Muni Code.
So are these only goats, or are there other livestock.
I only wrote it as goats. I leave that up to
The
the
ordinance just says goats.
ordinance just says goats because
But
we
we
had
just
some,
don't wanna slip anything in.
Right, you don't want-
Because if it's goats specified, we don't want several cows.
right. Well, the ordinance says just goats. It says notwithstanding the definition of livestock, because you already have a prohibition of keeping livestock in the city. So notwithstanding that definition, we're going to allow goats and goats only for the purpose of land clearing. So that also is going to prohibit people from deciding they want to be a backyard breeder or they want to have their own soap or milk or cheese. That's not going to be allowed. What's going to be allowed is going to be just for purposes of land clearing.
So if we're talking about kudzu vines, we're talking about goats eating everything.
These are the experts. I hope so, because I'm watching, because I'd love to have some,
Yeah, I'm gonna get to some questions I have for you
I don't know about that.
as it relates to the diets.
Whenever y'all tell me.
Victoria, you finished with your
Yeah.
introduction to this? Okay, let's let the goat man,
Can we leave that up there?
Cede the floor.
Councilman, just before this nice gentleman starts, and thank you for being here, we appreciate you. The thought process was an ordinance with a timeframe for implementation that gives staff the opportunity to develop these permitting guidelines. So right now, this draft before you doesn't have this shall be effective within 90 days of the date of being passed, if we were to entertain that.
We hadn't got to that bridge yet where we
sir.
say specifically as it relates to a parameter of time.
Yes, sir, and there are a lot of details to be worked out, male goats, female goats, all the things that Victoria's got here, that we need a little bit of time to flesh out what that permitting process looks like, what department it's gonna fall within, and how we're gonna administer and then enforce that process, collect the fees. A lot of details there, so just talking with staff, we feel like we need at least 90 days to officially be able to come up with that permit process after the ordinance is passed.
would you, if we decide to pass this out, would you anticipate it going to council as it is here and then at council amend it to give you a 90-day period or?
I think we would probably make the amendment with the time frame, and then it goes to council. It could be referred up, but we would do an amended version, so. Okay.
I didn't, if you don't mind me asking, I didn't understand that. So it would go to council and be approved, and then 90 days we would have guidelines?
So that would give us 90 days to develop the permit process. And
Gotcha.
so, I mean, if council were to entertain this in the first meeting in September, and it's 2 readings, and they were to approve it, in order for it to be an effective process, we've got to have a way for folks to apply for that permit, for the owners to apply for the permit. So
Gives you more time to dig deeper, for lack of.
flesh out the
better
detail,
word.
thank you.
And may I ask your name, sir?
Sheila, I'll give you a call.
Awesome.
Would you introduce yourself and your address, please?
I'm Jacob Porter. I live in Neces, South Carolina, and I'm the owner of Green Goat Land Management. So I want to touch on, I got a couple things here, but I want to touch on a couple things she said. I'd like to help with the guidelines, just to provide, point of view, because I do this in other cities. I've worked for other cities. I do this all the time, and I'm going to have a pretty good point of view that some of y'all don't, because you don't run goats up and down the highway all the time. You probably haven't set up fences all over the place. The minimum lot size, I don't know. There's elderly people that's got a backyard no bigger than this room that can't afford a landscaper and can't do it, and they've got poison oak that's growing over the back of the house. I don't know about the minimum lot size, but I wanted to touch on that. Normally in Columbia, I don't bring more than 10 goats to any job. Wanted to touch on because there's a company in Athens, Georgia that brings 35 goats, make that money and move on. I don't do that. You put 35 goats in this room, it's dangerous. Even if they're sweet goats, it's dangerous to the environment, it's dangerous to the people, it's dangerous to the goats because they want to fight over one blade of grass. That's my blade of grass. But my point being is too many, if you was in the elevator with me yesterday or the other day at the city council meeting, there was 4 people in the elevator. It's a little crowded. Now put 40 people in the elevator. It's really uncomfortable. There's a point where too many is not a good thing. I think 10 is a good reasonable number for whatever job we're doing. If you put too many goats in a small area, you get erosion. Obviously, you get more of the cons to that. 100 goats poop a lot. It's a fact. Plus, I don't like when I wouldn't bring a large number of goats to a property because it's kind of scorched earth. I like 10 goats or less because what they do is they graze, and then they graze, and then they graze, and they really eradicate that kudzu or other stuff. They really wipe it down better. Even if it does take 7 days, it's better to do it correctly than it is to do it fast. Everything fast isn't always good. I had some questions that maybe you can answer later. The process of the permit, like they did in Belmont, is it going to be online with a Google Earth picture? Maybe you can answer those later. Who gets the permit? Do I get it or the landowner? I think y'all are leaning toward
Those
the landowner.
details we can work out.
Got you. The temporary electric netting, what I've always done before now is I always give a 6-foot easement from any public easement. I think that's a good number to write down is if there's a sidewalk, it needs to be. Example of the signs we use, just for you. It's 2-sided. It's got the 3 most common languages on it. There's a lot of Spanish speakers in Columbia.
Let me ask you a question. What's the minimum? You got 10 goats, you're using 10 goats per, is that per acreage or square feet?
Normally a half acre.
I'm sorry.
Normally a half acre, and 10 goats.
All right, let me ask this other question. Goats eat everything.
No, that's an old wives' tale. Goats don't eat cans. They don't eat paper. They don't eat plastic. Now a starving goat will, but my goats aren't starving.
All right, all right, they're not starving.
Roger.
You train them not to eat plastic and,
I don't have to train them. They just don't because they're not starving. They eat vegetation.
all right. So you got a place this size, you put 10 goats in here.
No.
So you maximize the number.
My goats eat about 200 square feet per goat per day. So 2 goats could do this room in a day, floor to ceiling.
All right, let me ask this question. I think I heard you say you prefer hen goats. What is that?
Hen goats?
Female goats?
10.
Oh, yeah, female goats are wethers, neutered males.
All right, I understand that, but how does that work into the equation? If not female goats, male goats?
Without testicles.
Yeah, okay.
Because they don't go in the rut, they don't stink, they're not chasing girls, they're worried about eating.
Well, that's my next line of questions. If it's a male goat and it's not been
Neutered.
they eat more.
Well, I mean,
They stink
they
less.
stink a lot more. The ones that have
What now?
the ones that have their testicles stink a lot because they cologne so they can chase the girls and smell good for them, and that's why we weather them, and so we can.
I don't, there's some details I don't want to know.
But you asked.
TMI.
Our wethers and our females, because of wethers don't worry about the girls, they worry about eating.
So no plastics, nothing other than vegetation.
Yeah, they're not garbage collectors.
Poison ivy.
They eat poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac, stinging nettle, kudzu. They eat kudzu by the pound. We had one goat eat so much he looked like a constipated sumo wrestler. We couldn't even open his eyes.
Let's move on.
There's some details I don't want to know, man.
And then So I thought 6-foot easement from any public walkway would be good. That way, you know, they got to go 6 feet onto somebody's property to touch the fence. Fence is low wattage. Those signs by law are required every 200 feet. Normally, when we know we're going to be on a walkway, we put them about every 100. I think that's, and there's an example y'all can keep. I got plenty more. They're two-sided. What was
Tell me
the
about
other-
the fencing.
Uh-huh.
Fencing, you corral a piece of property, electrified fencing. How does that work, sir?
It's a step-in fence.
Okay, tell me what that is.
You stretch it out, you step it in. It'd probably be better if you looked on our Facebook or our website, you can see us setting it up. And I would invite any of y'all,
How high?
42 inches. I would invite any of y'all that's in this decision-making process or guideline process, you let me know, and I'll take you to one of our job sites. But you need to bring saltines.
Bring what?
Saltines. The goats aren't going to visit with you for free. They will expect you to bring some saltines and give it to them. I'm just telling you the cost of admission. You don't drive your car for free, you got to put gas in it. Yeah,
Like Ritz cookies.
name a mammal on this planet that can survive without salt.
Jacob, I wanted to ask you another question. We talk about, in the draft ordinance, no longer than 7 consecutive days or 14 days in any 6-month period of growing season or whatever. Would the production or destruction rate that you're talking about in terms of what they consume, does that seem reasonable to you?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, sir. That was something I was going to bring up to you. So my goats, 10 goats can eat a half acre in about 7 days. I think most lots in Columbia are an acre. I think probably 15 and
Now, I think we're residential lots, we'd be half or less, maybe a quarter.
well, the ones that
average.
we've been going to seem to be about half an acre that they need done, but we can go with that. But I think 15 and 30 probably is more reasonable. Because again, I don't want to look at that and say 7 days, okay, I've got to bring 15 goats. I don't want to cram more in and break. I've set these barriers in place myself ethically because I know what's healthy for my animals and I know what's healthy for the environment. I don't want to cram more in just to meet a guideline and put my goats at risk or put the homeowner at risk or I don't want to create a problem just to meet a number.
Sure, no, I understand that. I think, would you say the majority of the time, the 10 goats could handle the
Oh, yeah.
half acres and
Oh,
stuff?
yeah.
No problem.
7 days I would say that 8 out of 10, 7 days is fine, but I bring up another point. Working for cities or commercial work, that's where, because y'all got kudzu, we have to have a variance somewhere in there where if the city wants to hire me to do a kudzu over here that's 10 acres, there's no way I could bring 100 goats and not get done. We got to find some way to wiggle out of that one.
And then there could be in the process of residential and then a commercial, and separating that through the permitting process. We'll have to talk with Dana.
Because on our commercial jobs, like what we did for the city of Belmont, we brought 20 goats. And they was there for about 3 months, but they ate 55 acres. And even 55 acres in 3 months I'm still moving them right along. But I'm not bringing more than 20. I think that's plenty.
Sure.
They're doing 4 acres they was doing 4 acres every 11 days. I mean,
Can we actually change that to make goats per square feet over?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, yeah.
So we may want to, and that's in the ordinance.
Yeah.
So we may want to tweak that a bit as well as adding that time frame to develop the process for effectiveness if y'all so choose. So we need to amend.
Jacob, let me ask,
yes, sir.
and I'm just piggybacking on something you said at council meeting. How are the goats, I shouldn't say how are the goats paid, but what's the cost?
My cost or the cost to the person?
How does that figure in terms of the acreage and the size of the lot and that sort of thing?
So I charge $10 per goat per day. So if a goat eats you know, if this was the place and you needed 2 goats for a day, I'd probably charge $30 mileage from Orangeburg and $20. So I would do this room for $50. That's setting up, and I don't charge anything set up defenses, so I would do this room for $50. And I don't know a landscaper would come in here and weed whack this whole room for $50.
Well, the goats are the weed whackers.
Roger, but they're more like the weed eaters.
You know.
Just being technical.
Well, I understand that. I think the thing that is, I think important, if we look at this in terms of usage within the city, I think we need to be very clear, whether it's a requested service, how much is it gonna cost? I mean, that's gonna be the pivotal question, I believe. What is it gonna cost? And I think I heard you clearly say $10 per goat. If it takes 20 goats, 11 days, I mean, that's simple. I can figure that within my own head. Okay, all right. That gives me a better picture, Brother Jacob.
Clint, if we want to send this back to council, do you want us to give you permission to change those 7 and 14?
Yes, sir, if you would, just to consider that. And we may, Dana, we may work, we'll get together and work.
May I ask what we're considering changing?
So we may go to per square footage, we may look at extending, we may bifurcate residential and commercial and give a little more
Well,
time for commercial.
And if I can offer my 2 cents worth, I'm fine with the 7 goats per half acre, but just have a pathway to ask for an extension. And somebody can come by there and then.
And a pathway to increase the number of goats. That's what I. is that
Yeah,
what I
if it's
hear?
commercial.
More days.
Yeah.
I think we can work something out there.
Well, and if y'all got any other questions for me,
We will get you with the committee that's, the employees that are going to be drawing up these requirements and let you have your input.
all right, thank you.
Thank you, Jacob, appreciate that. And Robert?
Council and committee, I really want to say that the idea was to get Mr. Porter involved and actually understand how the guidelines need to work out. But we need to make sure that any guidelines we put in place, you know, right now we're talking about a proprietary business. But, you know, we had some goats at our shelter last week that came from another business in Richland County already. So we need to be prepared for this goat business to possibly grow and make sure that any guidelines we put in place is not just for one, it's for all. Right. I would also caution to say today's price is $10 a goat, but if we put a permit fee on in the city of Columbia to collect up front, that price could change for the homeowner.
Well, that's between Mr. Porter and the client.
Correct.
Yes, sir. That's right. That's a contractual arrangement.
Right.
Is that right, Robert?
That would be a contractual arrangement between the goat person and the homeowner, correct?
Any other questions,
So
Ed?
Clint, so in the process, we're gonna be tweaking what we have and sort of delving deep into the, lack of a better word, the weeds of it all.
Yes, sir. So I think the action of this committee would be to give us the opportunity to amend the ordinance, but refer the concept of that ordinance on to council for consideration at the earliest possible time, if y'all so choose to do that. And then we would make the modifications, add the time frame, and then that would give us 90 days to flesh out the details of the permitting process and be able to implement that process and the fee associated with it. And we would certainly work with Jacob to do that, any other interested party to do that. But that would give us some time to fill in the details, and we can come back to you and talk about those details as we get ready to implement that permitting process. But that wouldn't that wouldn't require an ordinance change.
Right.
Ordinance authorizes us to do that.
I've been listening on YouTube, so I'm caught up. Yeah.
Madam Chair, we've had a delightful discussion about the goat industry in the city of Columbia.
Did you talk about the potential change you wanted to make to the permit program?
To the what?
to the permit program?
Well, the permit program will be designed by a committee that Mr. Porter will be an advisor to.
Okay.
To get the details. What we want to do is, and I will make a motion to refer this back to the city council, giving the staff permission to tweak the
Sounds
consecutive
good.
days and the total days to meet the requirements of the industry.
And that's providing that everything is tweaked and that we've got the necessary, Clint, the necessary, time alliances.
Yes, sir, to develop the process.
To develop that process.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm fine.
Second, I'll second that.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, none opposed?
Thank you. So, Dr.
Moving on to
Bustles,
the next ordinance.
And we started off with Victoria giving a little bit of background, and Mr. Porter gave us some additional to address number one. And then number two and number three may dovetail together. Victoria's got a few slides that kind of set the table for that discussion. So if it's okay with you, we'll have her present those few slides, and then we can talk about each of those.
Yeah, and before she begins, just context for both of you. This was something that was brought up by a community group as something that had been considered in the past. I thought it'd be nice for us to talk about it in depth here at the committee. I will say up front that neither of these ordinances, in my opinion, would be particularly effective unless we have Richland County on board as well that has a similar or identical ordinance. But wanted to get the conversation started and asked Clint and his team to provide some background and history and look at the different possibilities. We know that, Columbia Animal Services continues to be overburdened by the number of dogs coming in. Many of them are a pity breed, and the majority of them still come from the county. So just wanted to put that out there as we begin. Victoria, we'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bustles. So yes, next on the agenda is mandatory spay neuter versus improved pet licensing. And before I dive into that, I really wanted to give everyone a look at this flyer that I recently obtained from a conference hosted by Best Friends Animal Society out of Houston just a couple of weeks ago. This is something that we've been looking at for a while now, and this is a really short and sweet recap of breed labeling and why it is frowned upon. If you look at these 4 examples here, I can tell you right off the bat, from a shelter standpoint, we would easily say lab mix, poodle mix, pit bull mix, probably schnauzer mix, or something within that general family. However, per DNA testing, we see that the predominant breed traits in these 4 examples come out pit bull terrier, shockingly enough on that guest poodle. What we would label number 3, Ryder here, is a pit bull mix, came back predominantly beagle. And number 4 is a Australian cattle dog. So the reason I'm showing this to you today is because when we did look at these ordinances historically with our legal department, we ran into a lot of roadblocks with pit bull specific spay neuter mandates. The only ordinance that we could find that was similar and already implemented was out of Beaufort. And per reading that, the big question is, how do you identify the dogs as pit bull breeds? That particular ordinance leaves it up to the discretion of the shelter director. And I can tell you that I am not a DNA test, and I just told you what my guesses of those breeds that I just showed you would be, and they were inaccurate. Science will show you that 75% of dogs guessed visually by breed are inaccurate. Therefore, there's not a real solid way to say what your pit population is. Secondly, I think that we have fallen into a pattern of saying pit bulls are the problem, pit bulls are all that the shelter has. But again, if we were to DNA test every dog in our facility, 50% of that population is probably not pit bull heavy. We're going based off of physical characteristics, and again, that's not accurate. We don't truly know the genetic makeup of our shelter population. In addition to all of those points, significantly, there is a significant resistance of breed-specific legislation, I should say, from a national animal welfare standpoint. HSUS, ASPCA, and Best Friends, whom we are currently in a partnership with, do not back up this mindset, and we do not feel it's the right direction to go. So with our legal department, we pushed that aside and we said, okay, in reality, there's a pet population problem in general, no matter what the breed is. We have too many cats and too many dogs. So there was a blanket ordinance drafted to potentially reinforce a spay-neuter mandate on all pets. As Dr. Bustle's already mentioned, it is important to notate that 65% of our intake is from Richland County. So not only were there concerns that we wouldn't get the support or backing from them, they would have to follow suit in order for this to be effective. There was also some legality barriers in reference to professional dog breeders. So we looked at even weight restriction. All right, let's take breed out of it. Large dogs are the hardest population to move. Do we focus in and mandate some sort of spay-neuter ordinance around dog by size? But what happens when you have the small breed that comes in overweight, or when you have the large breed that comes in emaciated and underweight, which we do see quite often? So we hit a lot of roadblocks here, and we pondered for a bit longer with our legal department, and we felt like there was a better way to go about this that would help give folks in the community incentive to spay neuter without putting in these harsh mandates or zooming in on breed-specific legislation. So our differential licensing ordinance currently, Section 462, license of cats and dogs, is what we've been operating by, and it requires anybody in city limits to license their pet annually. If your pet is already spayed or neutered, that's a $5 fee. If it's not, it is a $25 fee. What we are proposing is to revamp this ordinance and offer a one-time lifetime licensing fee of $25 if your pet is spayed, neutered, and microchipped. And I'll talk about the resources that can support that in just a moment. If your pet is not spayed, neutered, or microchipped, you would be looking at a $100 annual licensing fee. So one thing that we already have in place through the Animal Mission is a solid spay-neuter voucher program. If you look here, you'll see since 2006 through last fiscal year, Animal Mission has provided funding for over 58,000 citizens through low-cost spay-neuter efforts. That's totaled over $2.5 million, all from donated funds. So that's a solid program even today. The shelter would help with microchipping efforts at low cost. This could get people in compliance with spay, neuter, and chipping to allow them to exercise that one-time lifetime fee. We do feel this would create greater incentive for pet owners to spay, neuter, and hopefully generate a little bit more revenue from that program. If you look here currently, we put more money into the program than we get back, spending on average $54,000 per year and only receiving $43,000 back from that. So we would hope to see an increase in revenue, and then we could apply that revenue to other efforts to become more friendly with our local vet clinics, maybe make pet licensing a bit easier. Right now, it is a very manual process. It does require supplies and manpower that are difficult for us. If we could revamp this ordinance and redirect these resources and increased revenue, we would like to strengthen vet partnerships, maybe offer electronic reminders online and online payment options for pet licensing. As right now, the only way to license your pet is by mail or to come into the facility. And that's not the most convenient, especially in today's world. Additionally, we would like to apply some of this revenue to greater transparency marketing efforts. But before I roll into that, are there any questions pertaining to this?
Victoria,
Yes,
you're going to get into that transparency issue.
Yeah, so several questions. I mean, it's great to see 4,000, but we know that there are many more pets than the 4,000.
Absolutely.
My biggest concern is that we continue to operate in the red with this current existing license program. To be honest with you, I didn't even know that I had to license my pets until I joined a dog park, and automatically they required us to give the $5 towards the city. So, I mean, going back to the two ordinances, I agree with you. A blanket ban or restriction on a specific breed, particularly pit bulls, is not the avenue that I would like to go. And, you know, I'm happy to open it up. Okay, because I think that there's a lot of discrimination for no reason. I do think overpopulation continues to be an issue. But I don't think that, and this is a question for Clint, you and the team, if there's an opportunity to really kind of outsource this licensing program where vets are the ones that are taking it on, the same way we kind of, you know, created a triage system with our water department. I am open to a third party helping us with this. This is not something I think our Columbia Animal Services should be worried about. They should just be worried about getting the revenue and being able to apply it to different programs. I don't think I would be in favor of additional manpower internally going towards this, since we have so many resources. But one thing I would want to have up and running pretty quickly is the online payment program.
Sure, yes, ma'am. And I think it's possible to partner with our veterinarian community and some of the other partners to help us do the licensing. Yeah, yeah.
And that is definitely one of our goals, is to strengthen those relationships and see if we can, at the time of getting your rabies vaccination, go ahead and license right there with your veterinarian.
Rabbit Gallery.
No, I'm fine.
So, and then, in terms of updating the licensing, just to understand, we would have to make these changes via ordinance, or these are more programmatic changes? What exactly would have to change in the ordinance?
For
It had to be an
62.
ordinance.
Oh, for the pricing?
Correct.
Okay.
Particularly if you look, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I would be fine with that. I just want to make sure that, this whole like us operating with less than what we, put into it changes. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time to update the ordinance. So,
Madam Chair, we have two ordinances in front of us, neither one of them which I think need to be pushed forward. I'd like to table those two and ask the staff to come back with another ordinance that would
Similar.
that would take care of the suggestions that you have here.
Correct.
Yeah.
That is the
And that
proposal.
was gonna be my concern. How do you take and wrap both of those things into one that would sort of speak holistically to where we need to be?
yeah, I'd like to, I think we should, have them come back with an update on the licensing ordinance. And maybe table these other two that are on the agenda right now about, spay and neuter until, when appropriate. And then that way we can address some of these things. What do you think?
Yeah.
And I also think that some of the spay and neuter ordinances, and I shared this with some of our community groups as well, they have to happen on a state level. A lot of this has to happen for consistency on a state level. And I would be very in favor of us having a discussion once that happens, but for us to do it, the lines feel kind of arbitrary.
I don't think it'll ever happen at the state level either.
Yeah, sure, but,
Not in South Carolina.
our problem is overpopulation and the number of dogs being euthanized because of overpopulation. So whatever we can do to reduce that, and if that means encouraging spay and neuter, and I like Robert's idea, maybe we incentivize the vets that are participating to help offset some of that cost. I don't know. We would have to think about that, and that's what I'd like the staff to think about, is how do we then encourage spay and neuter through our licensing program? And then I would want to share, of course, that from what I understand, Palmetto Lifeline has gone to Richland County with a licensing program. I'd want us to mirror some of our aspects similarly in terms of like online payment and how the vet partnerships work to keep it consistent, since people will be going to vets both in and outside of the city. And if there is a capacity concern or issue, I do want us to also explore, potentially having them help run that program for us. So that, again, Victoria and her team can just focus on getting the revenue and implementing the different programs that we have.
And if we could, it would help tremendously. If we could take both of the pieces that we've seen here this morning, wrap it into one, something that the verbiage is usable and friendly. I think it would be to our advantage to dig deep into that.
Yes, sir, and I think, and I'm
And
sorry.
I think that's the point. I think that
Councilman, I don't think we want to wrap this language into anything. I think we need to table these two and let them come up with a new ordinance.
I understand that. Do you want Victoria to do that, or do you want Clint and the team to
I think
do
it's
that?
Clinton and
Well,
the
I
team,
think-
including
I think
Victoria,
that
to
is
do
the
that.
Yeah, well, I would think it would probably be
These two are not
be to our
good.
advantage.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And that's what I'm saying. I mean, we've read that, and we understand that it needs to be reconfigured. We
Yes, sir.
understand that.
And we hear you loud and clear, moving away from a mandatory
That's correct.
spay neuter to more, through the licensing program, more incentivizing spay, neuter, chipping through the licensing fee, and then incentivizing business partners to help us with implementing that program, and then building a business case where what does it make sense for us to manage versus private sector to manage and stop losing money on
Yeah,
the
my thing is, like, if I had to develop a
Yeah.
metric for success, it would be, we'd be either breaking even or in the green, ideally in the green. And we start to see a, significant, decrease in the number of in terms of overpopulation. And I think it's possible, but I think two pieces have to be in place of consistency across city and county, and then also, being very deliberate on how we're administering the program through vet partnerships.
Absolutely. And
But
I-
we're actually not talking about tabling anything, we're talking about reconfiguring.
We're
All of
tabling these
We're
two
talking about
ordinances.
tabling.
But we're not talking about, we're not acting on anything, right?
No, sir, not in these two.
We
I
got
don't
two
believe
ordinances
so.
on our agenda.
But we're not tabling anything. What we've been asked to do is either to approve this or to reconfigure the language and the verbiage there. So Howard says table, I just say, let's reconfigure it.
So I'd like to make a motion to table ordinance number 2023-100 and 2023-101 and reconfigure our existing licensing program and ordinance for our next meeting. That will include some of the details that Victoria has
I second,
presented to us today.
I second that.
So we've got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
No.
Opposed? Yes, sir. I think we understand where you're
I think
coming,
we're all on
all
the
of you
same
are coming
page.
from.
We're on the same page, just different verbiage.
Yes, sir.
Correct.
All right.
And I go back to Victoria's last slide. There is a better way at the bottom. We want to try to define that better way, put some meat on that skeleton and come back with something that y'all can.
And in terms of timeline, if we could work towards the January 1st kind of implementation, that would be, I think, doable. Or at least, start getting some vet agreements in place by then. So our next meeting would be September, the last week of September. So hopefully by then we have an update to the language on the licensing program and then can move it along to,
I like January
Council.
1st target date.
yeah, I think that's a good target date.
We'll work toward that.
He's like, I like that because I won't be here. Okay, bye.
You won't be there, brother.
So if y'all have, do y'all have time for just another slide
Oh,
or
yeah,
two?
yeah, absolutely. But I just wanted to make sure we were all kind of thinking through the different moving pieces and being clear about community discussion on the ordinances and on the agenda.
Yes.
Thank you.
So moving on to the topic of transparency, I'd like to go ahead and make it known that nationally, intake in animal shelters is up 4% across the country. After our last committee meeting, we did have a revisit with our mentors out of Horry County as well as Best Friends. And we really zoomed in on transparency as we acknowledged that that is the area that even though we're being transparent, there's room for improvement. What can we do to take it a step further and increase live release? We were encouraged by our mentors to find a way to start getting dogs at risk of euthanasia out to the public in advance. And historically, we never really generated those lists in advance. So we have made some internal procedure modifications to now have animals as we advertise them in line for euthanasia. And we're promoting these animals through a new platform as of July 26th. We do have a new social media platform to advertise these dogs at the highest risk. These are adoptable dogs at the highest risk of euthanasia. And what we are doing is making those lists and making it known that these are next in line. We do not have a euthanasia date as it all depends on intake. Thus far, we have seen a 100% live release rate of those dogs. The last count of those dogs was about mid-50. I believe it was 54 or 55 dogs total. We are continuing to market these dogs on a weekly basis to put the public on notice. And we are very proud of the community step up and outreach that we've received from that. In addition to that, Horry County suggested we come up with a more consistent way to share our numbers. So thus far, every Friday, we have been posting our weekly intake and outcome numbers for the community to see as well. we are very aware that we should not be hiding from the community, and that's never been our intent. We are looking at ways that we can continue to become more transparent, as the community can only be a part of the solution if they're aware of what we need. We are not stopping there. We have, within the past 2 weeks, made connections with large transport services to also explore how we can start moving dogs in bulk upstate or across the country to get them out of the shelter as well. But I think it's important to know that these marketing efforts are time consuming. And one of the biggest kickbacks that we're getting right now is the posts aren't being updated in time. Citizens aren't getting answers to their questions on these social media platforms. So again, going back to the revamping of that spay neuter ordinance, if there is any additional revenue or resources that we can replace, we would like to do it towards these marketing efforts as well, in order to keep maintaining a transparent image and keeping our community engaged and on notice.
Victoria, one of the things that I do want to commend you for is that based upon our initial meeting and some of the concerns that came out of that initial meeting as it related to the issues that were brought to your attention, the transparency issue slide represents some of that work that you've done to sort of center ourselves into that whole transparent mode. And that's great, because that's one of the things we ask you to do. And of course, thank you for that.
Thank you.
And thank you, Reverend McDowell, for that comment. And I think, Victoria, great work, and the August numbers look terrific. Really, really good work there. I think the challenge is continuing that forward momentum and not getting community fatigue.
That's correct.
As we continue to say, these animals are at risk. And you know, so how do we continue to build a toolbox? How do we continue to operate transparently, but involve the community and those community sheltering activities, rather than it just being the city's problem? It's the whole of us as a community and our issue.
Absolutely. The core of the issue is still intake. While we are receiving great response and placement of these dogs right now, it's important to note that many of these dogs are funneling into our foster system, which at some point will also hit capacity, as we have very few program coordinators to sustain these numbers. So we're always encouraging people to promote for rescue pools and commitments or adoption to make it a final. In addition to that, our fiscal year just ended with an 80% live release rate. That is not 90%, but it is the highest number that a fiscal year has ended with. So it just goes to show we are on the up. Currently, for the month of August, we are at a 91% live release rate. We have no doubt that it's due to these new efforts of transparency. And as you've mentioned, we would like to see the energy and the community involvement stay there. But it is important to take into consideration that compassion fatigue can hit your community just as it can your organization. So we're looking at ways, again, transport efforts and other ways to help the community help us so that we don't turn into this cycle of burnout as we increase live release.
Victoria, the chairperson mentioned a few minutes ago the percentage of animals that come from the county area. What is that percentage?
Currently at 65%.
65% of the animals. And so if we're getting that many from the county, it's pushing dogs towards euthanasia at the other end of the line.
Correct. That's correct.
It is important for Richland County to be on board with the direction that the city would like to go. And per a recent discussion, they are on board with these license changes. I do feel confident that they would follow suit.
Okay.
Much easier than they would a spay-neuter mandate, which I
Can
think
you,
we're all-
and can you talk a little bit about, so in terms of working with Richland County, I know they don't have their own animal services, but do they have like staff that are similar to you at the county level that you work with? Like who do you work with there typically?
So they have their own set of animal control officers and their own director who oversees their policies and operations. I will say that they're easy to work with. We have a good working relationship, but just like us, they have the same community challenges and a much larger jurisdiction than what we have. So it has been, we're trying to find a balance to appease the community, but also make the community understand the needs, and their director does seem on board with recent discussions that we've had in helping us improve live release.
So, speaking of animal control, one of the suggestions that I was looking at was potentially additional training for the animal control officers that allow them to then potentially directly do the citations or provide citations if something is against code. I don't know enough about what they're able to do right now, but could that be something that we look into to see? I was reading about how you can be like a Class C trained animal control officer, and I'm not sure ours are. Is that correct?
Yeah, Victoria, I'll defer to you and Robert on that.
I believe Richland County does have a little bit of a different policy than city. It's my understanding that they may have the option to become sworn in after a certain term of employment. That is not anything that the city currently does offer. I'm sure we could have discussions about it. We have had those discussions historically. Right now, animal control officers do cite on misdemeanors in city code. They do not cite on a state level. So they can reinforce general care, at large, spay-neuter license, ordinance violations. But really, what we're trying to look at, unless it is something that is felony level and very serious, in which case we put that in the appropriate hands, is helping the community versus just citing them. If you are out of compliance, how can we get you into compliance? Is there a resource that we can offer you? We're not about just impounding your pet because you failed to provide a doghouse. We want to provide that doghouse for you now and maybe check on you once in a while and make sure that you and your pet are doing well. Times are very hard right now, and that's no secret. If citations are issued and we can get the owner within compliance before their court date, many times that we will drop those citations. Again, unless it is something a little bit more severe that would fall into the lines of animal neglect or cruelty.
Got it. That's helpful to know. It might be something that we look at down the road after we get some of these pieces done.
I'm sorry, Dr.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the key points, I think, is allowing the community to know that marketing piece. The more you know, the more you need to know. And one of the things I think that is consistent with what you said, with this transparency piece, is that you are allowing and will allow community to know exactly what you're doing. And that in itself becomes a pivotal point in this whole issue of animal services and that sort of thing. So I think that marketing piece, as it relates to the number of animals that has been euthanized, whatever that issue are, I think it's needful for that community to know exactly what we're doing.
Thank you. We are very well aware that is just as much as the community may seem like, quote unquote, the problem, they can be just as much the solution. We can't see
It can
live
be the
release
problem
increase without
too.
their help.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more really quick slide and then we'll move on. So-
Sounds good.
So at our last committee meeting, we did briefly touch on the fact that we were undergoing a space planning study. The talk around this did start late in 2022. We went through an RFQ process and several architectural firms. We ultimately decided on Animal Arts out of Colorado. And in June of this year, they did come and spend a few days at our facility to assess our operations, our working spaces, animal housing. They have come back with a full and formal report that is still under review. We just received that a few days ago. But the nutshell of it is we're currently operating at about 31,000 square feet. They feel that we do need at least 35,000 square feet. And mostly this is based on our current structure accommodating animal housing, but not so much staff housing. It is no secret if you come to our facility that we have program coordinators working out of conference rooms and break rooms and wherever we could establish a network hookup. We've evolved so much over the past several decades. We now have program coordinators for these life-saving programs and really no adequate space for them to work efficiently. The estimated cost for a new building falls between 22 and 25 million. And again, we are still evaluating the full report that was recently given to us. We just wanted to give everyone an update on where things were with the space planning study.
And part of the issue too is the location. You know,
Yeah.
the location of it, the age of the facility, that it's not as much as square, you can build a lot more square footage, but that will get full too.
And that was, how do you balance, like,
do you-
you know,
Correct.
does the problem just get bigger?
You don't want to, the additional square footage would not be to accommodate additional animal housing space. Perhaps we would work in an isolation component somewhere there. We do lack that right now for certain illnesses. It would really be to accommodate staff working spaces. They obviously proposed demolition of our current structure due to improper draining and air ventilation systems. Very common for animal shelters to have these issues, but they were recommending, in a perfect world, to build up with the appropriate drainage and air ventilation, as well as office spaces for staff.
So any existing buildings that we might find would need substantial renovation.
Correct.
Or this is the estimated cost to build from new, which is a big number.
Yeah.
34,000.
The council has talked about a new facility for animal control. And if we could get an old shopping center or an old
Or something
Walmart
donated and then work
or
from
something
there.
like that, you
Offset the
might be able
cost.
Absolutely.
to do it for less than $25 million.
And the biggest component there is mostly that drainage system. We did look at existing structures, and the feedback was the amount of work that it would take to implement the proper drainage here would cost more than it would be to build up.
Yeah.
There's a lot to take into consideration.
Yeah, no, this is helpful.
We'll have some more detail to present next time. We're just now getting the draft of the study.
Can you do like a option B of if we had an existing, I think there were some properties we were looking at, so, okay.
Most definitely. This is really hot off the press for us.
Well,
so-
I'm excited. Thank you, Victoria. This is helpful.
Thank you.
And look forward to
Victoria,
hearing about the updates to the licensing program.
You know, one of the beneficial things, I think Dr. Bustles talked about this the last time, and we talked about it the last time, is having a continuous conversation on animal service and allowing you to do what you did today. And
Excellent
very,
presentation.
very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Executive session.
I will entertain a motion.
So, Madam Chair, I move we go into executive session for discussion of negotiations, incidents, proposed or contractual arrangements pursuant to SC Code 30-4-70A2, homeless service contracts.
Bye.